For years, space remained silent above Earth, calm and untouched, while humans continued their lives unaware of the danger slowly creeping toward them. Deep beyond the stars, the Dravari watched from their hidden fleets, gathering data, studying Earth's defense systems, scanning its history of war and chaos. They saw a planet divided by borders, arguing over power and profit, fighting each other more than preparing for any outside threat. The Dravari believed Earth was nothing more than a soft, confused planet, waiting to be conquered without resistance. They had done this before. Dozens of worlds had fallen to them, and in their pride, they marked Earth as another simple target. The supreme commander of the fleet, proud and sure, gave the order to advance. The first signs came in silence. Satellites failed without warning. Communications dropped across continents. Military radars showed nothing but static. Then the sky opened. Giant black shapes appeared above Earth's largest cities. Hovering ships unlike anything ever seen cast massive shadows on the ground. They made no effort to hide. They didn't have to. These invaders believed no one on Earth could stop them. At first, people stared in disbelief. Some ran, some tried to capture it on their phones. Others froze, but not everyone stood still. Deep inside a bunker in the northern highlands, a signal reached Earth's elite warrior unit. The Iron Response Division was not like ordinary military groups. They had trained for the worst-case scenarios. They knew that one day something might come from beyond. And when that day arrived, they were ready. Within minutes, the bunkers lit up with movement. Gear was strapped on. Orders were shouted. No hesitation, the leader of the Iron Division, a calm and hardened soldier named Ray, looked over the incoming data. He saw where the enemy was landing. He saw the pattern. He didn't waste time with fear. He turned to his team and gave a single nod. It was enough. They all knew what to do. These men and women were trained not just in combat, but in adaptation. They didn't fight by the book. They used terrain, surprise, unpredictability. Things the Dravari didn't understand on the Dravari command ship. Their officers watched Earth's military response and laughed. They called it slow, they said. It was scattered. Their ships landed with heavy metal legs on open ground, forming camps and outposts. Troops began sweeping through cities and towns with weapons that disintegrated walls and crushed vehicles. Civilians were captured, herded, and studied. The Dravari spoke in their strange tongue, certain that humans would fall in line like the rest. But they made a mistake. They didn't see what was happening underground. While the Dravari spread out, Earth's warriors spread in. They used tunnels, sewers, forests, and mountains. They communicated in silence. They didn't try to meet the enemy face to face. They hit fast, disappeared faster, then hit again from another angle. The Iron Division struck the first blow. A Dravari scout team stationed near a mountain pass was ambushed at night. Explosives shattered their armored suits. Sharp blades pierced their exposed joints. By the time the alien reinforcements arrived, the only thing left was a burning vehicle, and a human symbol painted in ash on a rock. Panic didn't show on the Dravari's faces, but confusion did. Their record said humans fought messy, emotional wars, but this was something else. This was calculated fury. More strikes came over the next few days. Communication towers set up by the Dravari were torn down. Supply lines were cut. A patrol unit in the forests vanished without a trace. Cameras captured shadows moving between trees, eyes glowing in the dark. Whispers in static. Ray and his team stayed on the move. They never stayed in one location longer than an hour. They split into squads, each with a mission, each with a plan. They gathered local fighters, trained them fast, and used their knowledge of the land. Every hill, every river, every alley was turned into a weapon. The Dravari began to lose numbers. Not many, but enough to notice. The Supreme Commander finally addressed Earth. A massive broadcast appeared in the skies above cities, translated into human language. He warned humanity to surrender. He promised peace if resistance stopped. He showed images of destroyed cities on other planets, reminders of what could happen next. But Earth didn't bow. The answer came from a single hijacked transmission. A soldier, face half burnt and armor cracked, stared into the camera and said 3 words. "Come and try." That was when things began to shift. The Dravari had expected fear. What they got was fury. They had come with machines and beams of destruction. But Earth responded with chaos, with fire, with will. Each village they attacked became a trap. Each road they traveled exploded from. Below, each human they captured fought back with teeth and nails. The aliens started using more force, but the harder they pushed, the harder Earth pushed back. The Iron Division's actions inspired other nations. Resistance groups formed across every continent. Soldiers returned to fight beside strangers. Cities once broken began to rebuild in secret. Engineers and hackers found ways to jam alien signals. Even school teachers and farmers became soldiers overnight. Earth was waking up by the end of the first week. The Dravari lost 3 command units and an entire scout ship. They began pulling back from certain zones. It wasn't defeat yet, but it wasn't easy anymore. The Supreme Commander stared at the growing casualty reports. His officers began whispering behind closed doors. Something was wrong. The humans were not like the others. They didn't break, and as the sky darkened again over a ruined valley, the Iron Division prepared their next strike. They weren't just defending now. They were hunting. The night air smelled of smoke and metal. The ground still shaking from distant explosions as Ray and his squad moved through the dark valley with practiced silence. They wore armor scorched from previous battles, carried weapons that had been repaired and modified too many times, and carried with them a look in their eyes that was now familiar across all human forces, determination that would not break, no matter how much was thrown at them. The Dravari still believed in numbers, in the size of their ships and the power of their weapons. But what they didn't understand was that Earth's warriors didn't fight to win glory or conquest. They fought because there was no other choice. They fought because surrender meant extinction. Ray stopped near a rocky outcrop and raised his hand. His squad froze immediately, eyes scanning the hills ahead. From where they stood, the glow of a Dravari camp pulsed faintly in the distance. Tall black machines stood in a circle, guarding something at the center. The intelligence gathered earlier said it was a mobile energy hub, one of several the aliens had placed to charge their weapons and send data to their command ship. If this hub fell, the entire southern advance would lose power and connection. Ray gave his orders in low whispers. The team split, moving into the dark with the silence of wolves. Across the planet, similar scenes unfolded. From the burning ruins of cities to the depths of forests and deserts, resistance groups were now well coordinated. They didn't wear matching uniforms, and many of them had never held a weapon before the invasion. But they learned fast. Human soldiers began to master Dravari tactics and equipment. Engineers pulled alien drones from wreckage and reprogrammed them. Mechanics built makeshift shields out of scrap. Hackers found backdoors in the alien networks and sent ghost signals to confuse enemy patrols. Even children acted as lookouts, passing messages through chalk symbols on broken walls. This was not a single army. This was an entire planet rising. The Dravari didn't know how to handle it. They increased their firepower. They called for reinforcements from orbit. They dropped shock squads into high conflict zones. Still, the humans refused to fall back. They vanished into tunnels, appeared where least expected, struck with brutal precision, then melted away into the night. At first, the Dravari commanders thought it was chaos. But over time, they began to see the pattern, and that frightened them more than anything. There was control behind this chaos. Someone was guiding these attacks with military accuracy in the command ship above Earth. The Supreme Commander stood before a glowing war table, watching red lights blink across the surface of the planet. Those lights marked human activity. Each day there were more. He turned to his officers and demanded an explanation. One of them spoke cautiously, saying the humans had adapted faster than expected. They were no longer reacting. They were now controlling the flow of conflict. The Supreme Commander, silent for a moment, clenched his hands and gave a new order if control was the enemy. Then chaos must be used in return back on Earth. Ray and his team had reached the edge of the Dravari camp. They used smoke to distract. The machines then charged from 3 sides at once. Explosives set around the perimeter tore open the energy hub. The blast turned night into day. Dravari soldiers scrambled, firing wild shots as shadows moved among them. Ray fought like a man who had nothing left to lose. Every motion was efficient. Every decision was made in a heartbeat. The battle was over in less than 10 minutes, the camp now a crater of twisted metal and burning circuits. As the humans pulled back, they carried no prisoners, no trophies, only wounded brothers and sisters on stretchers made from cables and cloth. By morning, the destruction of the energy hub had spread through alien communication channels. The southern offensive stalled. Their weapons shorted out, their drones lost coordination. Human forces surged forward, reclaiming lost ground. For the first time since the invasion began, cheers echoed through the broken streets of cities that had only known fear. People gathered to listen to radio transmissions reporting the attack. They heard the names of the Iron Division whispered with pride. Children drew their symbols on walls beside burned-out vehicles. Earth's spirit, once buried under shock and panic, had returned, but victory came with a price. In the north, a large settlement had been targeted by a retaliatory Dravari strike. The aliens dropped incendiary charges, turning the town into ash before any help could arrive. Hundreds were lost. Survivors spoke of black-armored soldiers with no faces walking through fire, leaving behind silence and ruin. It became clear to Ray and others that the Dravari were now angry. They no longer saw Earth as a mere stepping stone. They saw it as a threat, and threats had to be crushed without mercy still. Fear didn't take hold the way it had before. People wept for the dead, but they didn't give up. Instead, they reinforced their positions, trained harder, and prepared for the next strike. Every act of destruction from the aliens only added fuel to the human will. Earth was no longer just resisting. It was evolving. Ray sat one evening near a broken radio tower with his second-in-command, a quiet fighter named Joel, who had once been a teacher before the war. Joel looked at the sky, the stars barely visible behind drifting smoke, and said that before this all began, he thought humans would crumble in front of something so big. But now he saw something different. He saw unity where once there was division. He saw courage in those who had never held a weapon before. He saw something the aliens didn't see until it was too late. Ray didn't say much. He didn't have to. He simply stood, tightened the straps on his gear, and signaled the next move. There was no rest, no long speeches. Just purpose across the stars, in places the humans had never heard of. Other species were watching. Some feared what the Dravari had unleashed. Others saw hope in Earth's resistance. But none could deny that something had changed. Earth had become more than just a small blue planet. It had become a fire that refused to be put out, and as the days passed, the legend of Earth's warriors began to spread, not just among their own people, but across the Dravari fleets as well. Whispers of fighters who did not fear death, who struck like ghosts, who fought not for power, but for survival. The aliens had drawn first blood. But Earth had returned to the favor. Smoke curled into the air like twisted fingers as the sun tried to break through the dark sky, but failed again and again to shine on a world that no longer remembered peace. The cities looked like bones of giants, shattered and scattered across the land, and every block held a memory of what once stood there: laughter, joy, quiet, now gone. And yet within the ruins the fire of defiance burned, stronger than before, stronger than the invaders expected, stronger than even some humans believed possible. Ray and his team walked through the remains of a small town where once there had been a market and a school and music, and now only rubble and silence met them. Their boots crunched over broken glass and melted steel, but their eyes remained forward and their mission remained clear. In one of the collapsed buildings, a young boy emerged covered in dust, holding a piece of metal like a weapon. Ray knelt and took the sharp scrap gently from his hands, told him he would not need to fight alone anymore. Others were coming, others were already fighting, and they would win, not because they were stronger or had better weapons, but because they could not afford to lose. Across the hills beyond the town, dozens of resistance groups had joined into one growing force. They were no longer scattered fighters, they had become an army shaped by pain, held together by rage, and driven by a hunger for freedom. Field commanders began coordinating with former officers. Satellite engineers and retired scientists came together, building makeshift communication grids underground. Radio signals now pulsed through cities, warning of enemy movement, guiding troops and calling survivors to safe zones. Earth was changing, and the change was fast and wild and powerful. The Dravari Command Council met aboard the high-orbit mothership, their usual calm broken by reports that made no sense. Sectors marked as secured were now lost bases turned silent outposts. Overrun, the humans were using stolen technology, turning captured drones against their owners. They were no longer reacting. They were reshaping the battlefield. Their weapons were not as advanced, but their minds were unpredictable. Their resistance was spreading like fire across dry wood, and each failed Dravari assault made them bolder, more creative, more relentless. The Supreme Commander refused to believe that the tide could shift. He blamed his officers for incompetence. He blamed Earth's strange nature. He blamed bad luck. But he never blamed the core of his mistake, which was thinking humanity would break just like the others. But Earth was not like the others. Its people had grown up on a world that demanded strength. From birth, a world of storms, earthquakes, disease, and war. And from that pressure came something the Dravari never prepared for, something that could not be measured in numbers or scanned by machines. A strike on the Eastern Front turned into a major turning point. Ray led the charge with a group of mixed fighters. Some were former soldiers, some were engineers, some had never held a weapon before this war. Yet they moved as one through the narrow ruins of a broken industrial district, using every pipe, every tunnel, every shadow to their advantage. They lured the Dravari into the center of the city, then triggered explosions that brought down steel towers onto their armored units within minutes. The entire enemy line was in chaos, and from the dust Earth's warriors came out fast and merciless. Even as victories came, they did not celebrate, not loudly, not with joy. They mourned their dead with silence, buried them in craters marked with stones and symbols. They whispered promises to the fallen, promises to keep fighting, to not let it be for nothing, and then they moved on, always forward, because the war was not over, and every second counted, every breath could be the last, so they made each one count, made each step matter. Humans began adapting alien weapons to their needs. Old rifles now fired with greater force. Armor was reinforced, using alien plating and tactics evolved. Some fighters rode motorcycles carrying explosives, weaving through enemy lines like lightning. Others dropped from rooftops, striking with blades and retreating before a single shot could follow. The Dravari sensors tried to track them, but they could not predict such chaotic and varied attacks. In the north, a squad of young fighters intercepted a Dravari supply convoy using only a hacked drone and a remote-triggered avalanche. They took down 3 transports without a single casualty. The enemy began fearing the terrain itself, for even the ground seemed to turn against them, guided by human hands who knew every rock, every crevice, every secret path. Ray met with leaders of several resistance cells in a hidden bunker built under Collapsed rail station maps covered the walls, some drawn on fabric, others scratched into steel plates. Red markers showed enemy strongholds, blue ones showed human positions. But it was the black arrows that mattered most. These marked the next moves, surprise attacks, deep strikes, coordinated chaos. One leader spoke of sending a signal into space, a message not of surrender, but of defiance, a message to all who were listening that Earth stood, and Earth would not fall in that moment. A young fighter stepped forward. Her name was Mara, her voice steady, as she explained how her team had disabled a command beacon. With nothing but stolen tools and timing, they had learned the enemy patterns, watched and waited, and struck without hesitation. Ray looked at her not with pride, but with understanding, for he saw in her what he saw in every fighter, now a reflection of the world. They were trying to save one filled with scars and strength. The Supreme Commander launched a wave of orbital strikes. In desperation, targeting known resistance locations, entire forests. Burned cities, cracked mountains shook, but even in the ashes, Earth's warriors rose again. They built shelters from wreckage, weapons from ruin, and from each blow they found new ways to strike back. They had learned to live in the fire, and now the fire could no longer burn them. At the edge of the western wasteland, where no trees remained and wind howled through twisted steel, Ray stood before his squad and told them the next battle would decide everything, not just for their region, but for the message they would send across Earth and beyond. It was time to show the invaders that humans would not just fight to survive. They would fight to win. As night fell again over the wounded world, the stars above were no longer silent. Somewhere in those stars, other species watched, wondering what would happen next, wondering if the fire on Earth might one day reach them too. But for now, all eyes were on the planet that refused to bow. All eyes were on the warriors who rose from the dust and stood like giants before the storm. The ground trembled as massive Dravari carriers landed across Earth's surface, each one unfolding like a dark flower of war, releasing hundreds of enemy units with gleaming armor and weapons that hummed with deadly energy. The sky roared with the sound of descending dropships, and the air cracked with static as the invaders activated their war machines in every direction. Cities once quiet exploded with new battles, and the Dravari believed this final wave would crush all resistance. They believed the humans would break under pressure and be swept away like dust in a storm. But Earth did not break. The warriors had expected this move long before it came. They had read the patterns, they had learned the timing, they had studied the way. The Dravari pushed harder when they grew desperate, and they knew this would be the moment that tested everything the resistance had built, from ruins, bunkers, beneath broken buildings, old factories, turned into strongholds, mountains that now held hidden missile batteries, deserts wired with traps, and rivers rigged with charges. Earth had become living battlefield, and every piece of it answered to the will of its people. Ray stood inside the central command shelter, hidden beneath a wrecked satellite station where screens flickered and maps glowed with enemy positions. Around him were fighters from every region, bruised, armed, tired, and ready. The faces showed no fear, only focus, because they knew this was not just another defense. This was the line. This was where they either stood or fell. And if they fell, the planet would be lost above them. The Dravari flagship hovered, casting a wide shadow that swallowed the horizon from its massive hull. Energy beams fired toward key points on the surface, leveling buildings and forests alike. Enemy troops marched in thick formations, sweeping across highways, smashing through resistance barriers with calculated power. But even as they advanced, they met something they had not planned for, something no tactical program had prepared them for. They met resistance that did not retreating. The Kokari Eastern Ruins, a group of human fighters led by Mara, had set up an ambush in what used to be a factory district. They waited in silence, among piles of steel and broken glass. The moment enemy units moved into the center of the ruins, remote explosives were triggered. The walls collapsed, not down, but inward, crushing machines and soldiers together in a cloud of smoke before the aliens could recover. Mara and her team moved in fast, striking from above, from below, from places no logic could predict. They hit hard, they hit fast, and when it was done, they vanished, leaving only silence behind. Across the globe, similar battles unfolded. Bridges were destroyed. Mid-crossing tunnels collapsed while enemy forces passed through swamps once useless became deadly traps as human engineers rerouted water into enemy paths. Freezing cold and boiling heat were turned into weapons of terrain while civilians moved supplies and relayed messages under the radar. Every person who stood on Earth had a role. Now every hand helped carry the weight of Warray's team led the charge against one of the largest Dravari land bases located in the highlands where clouds clung to the mountain peaks and lightning danced between ridges. The base was heavily armed, shielded, and crawling with alien machines. But Ray knew the terrain, he knew the wind patterns, he knew the way the fog rolled in during the early hours, so they waited for the right moment when the mist covered everything in a thick gray blanket. And using that cover they moved undetected, silent as ghosts, climbing rocky paths and slipping past enemy patrols until they reached the heart of the base. There, they planted a device not meant to destroy but to disrupt it, released a pulse of static and raw energy that knocked out every alien sensor within a wide radius, giving human forces the opening they needed. Fighters emerged from hidden paths like rising shadows and launched a full assault. Chaos exploded as the base lost control, and the warriors used every second of confusion to dismantle it piece by piece. By the time the Dravari restored order, their command hub was in flames and their lines had been pushed back down the slopes. The Supreme Commander stared at the glowing war map in disbelief, his claws digging into the control table as red marks spread across every region, showing human advances where there should have been silence. He demanded more troops. He ordered more firepower. He gave command to a new AI system that could predict outcomes better than any living mind. But nothing worked, because the problem was not numbers or strategy. The problem was that humans did not behave like the species they had crushed before. They did not retreat when outgunned. They did not panic when surrounded, and they did not surrender when injured. Instead, they got smarter, faster, harder to predict, and more dangerous with each day. In a desperate attempt to turn the tide, the aliens deployed the Blackguard elite shock units that had never failed before. They landed in key cities, expecting to sweep through in hours. But what they found were traps. Waiting streets rigged to collapse, overhead wires turned into snare lines, and old subway systems filled with explosive pressure. They walked into death again, and their failure sent ripples of panic through the Dravari ranks, who now realized they were not dealing with a simple rebellion. They were facing a force that was becoming stronger through pain and through loss. Ray knew that the flagship above Earth was the true heart of the invasion. As long as it remained in orbit, reinforcements would keep arriving and the war would stretch on. So he called a meeting of all major resistance leaders and proposed the most dangerous mission yet: to infiltrate the flagship, to destroy its core from inside, and send a message that no invader could ignore. Many thought it was impossible, but none refused, because the war had reached a point where doing nothing meant defeat. Within days, a team was formed, a mix of fighters, engineers, hackers, and pilots, each one with a skill and a reason to risk everything. They used a stolen enemy ship, one barely functional, and disguised it with tech stripped from destroyed machines. Then they launched into the sky while the world burned below, and slipped through the flagship defenses by staying silent, by flying blind and trusting instinct more than systems. They landed inside the alien mothership and began the slow, deadly journey toward its reactor core, fighting room by room, system by system, disabling guards and cracking codes. Using every ounce of Earth's knowledge, every trick they had learned during this brutal war, they reached the heart of the beast, carrying explosives built from both alien and human parts. And as the final countdown began, Ray looked at the others and nodded, not with fear, but with fire in his eyes. This was not suicide, this was sacrifice, and it would change everything inside. The heart of the alien flagship, silence pressed against the walls like a living thing. The air was cold, not from temperature, but from the presence of something. Ancient, something built only for destruction. The corridor stretched wide with smooth black metal that pulsed like a vein every few seconds. A red light blinked along the walls, casting long shadows that made the human figures seem like ghosts from another world. Ray moved at the front, holding a scanner patched together from both Earth and Dravari tech. Behind him moved Mara, Joel, and two engineers, one carrying the core disruptor, the other checking their path with quick fingers and wide eyes. No one spoke, but every face carried the same expression. This was the end, and they had come to finish it. As they reached the central chamber, a giant door blocked their path. It stood taller than any building they had ever entered, its surface alive with strange patterns that shifted when touched. The engineers knelt down and began working their tools, quiet but fast. The others formed a circle, weapons raised, eyes sharp, ready for whatever came through the next door, because they knew the Dravari would not let them walk to victory without one final fight. Outside, Earth trembled. Under the fury of warships rained fire onto the ground, and resistance forces pushed back with everything they had. Some fired homemade rockets, others used rifles passed through generations. Some fought with knives and bare hands when ammunition ran out. The sky above was filled with fire, but the people of Earth had already decided they would not let the sky fall without taking the invaders with it. Back inside the flagship, the door finally opened and revealed a chamber glowing with energy. Blue and white lights swirled around a massive core suspended in midair, humming with unnatural power. It was not just a machine, it was alive in some way, built to keep the entire fleet connected, to act as a brain and a heart together. And as the humans stepped forward, the chamber responded. Figures emerged from the shadows, tall armored guards of the Supreme Commander himself, their eyes glowing, their blades already raised. Ray led the charge without hesitation, his weapon fired with precision and anger. Mara moved to flank, cutting through the defenders with the grace of a dancer and the rage of a wildfire. Joel stayed near the engineers, protecting them as they placed the device that would overload the core. Each second stretched into forever. As the battle raged inside the small chamber, sparks flew, walls cracked under blasts. One of the engineers fell, struck by a plasma blade, but the other kept working, even while bleeding, never once looking away from the device he was building. When the final guard fell, Ray turned toward the engineer, who nodded once and stepped back. The disruptor began to glow, a countdown starting on the display. 20 seconds until detonation, and with no way to escape, the team made their final choice. Ray looked around at his people, bruised, bloodied, alive in spirit. Even if they would not leave this place, he placed his hand on the core and whispered a quiet word, not for himself, but for the planet below, for the faces they had left behind, for the people still fighting. Then everything turned white. From the surface of Earth, a bright column of light tore through the clouds. The flagship shuddered, twisted, then cracked in half, its pieces falling like broken stars across the sky. Resistance fighters paused as they saw the destruction, and a wave of silence swept across every battlefield. It took only a few moments before cheers began to rise from ruins and trenches and tunnels. Voices crying, not in victory alone, but in relief and gratitude, in the realization that the nightmare was ending. The Dravari forces still on Earth received no more orders. Their network had gone dark, their chain of command broken, their belief in control shattered. Some tried to regroup, but the resistance pressed hard, not out of hate but out of the need to survive. And within days, Earth was no longer under siege, but under repair. The war was not over in every mind, but the battle for survival had been won. In the weeks that followed, people gathered at sites where the resistance had fought hardest. They rebuilt shelters, they cleared wreckage, they buried the fallen with honor and dignity. And on one hill just outside the remains of the capital city, they built a monument, not of polished stone, but of melted steel from the flagship wreckage, shaped into a great flame, and on its base they carved the names of those who gave everything. Ray, Mara, Joel, and the countless others who stood when no one else could. Stories spread across the planet, stories of how the world came Together, not through peace, but through shared pain, encouraged children listened wide-eyed as their parents told them how humans fought not for power, not for conquest, but because Earth was home, and no one gives up home without a fight. Scientists gathered alien tech and began reshaping the future. Engineers repaired the sky bridges and energy grids, and everywhere people remembered what it meant to belong to something greater than themselves. High in orbit above the quiet Earth, pieces of the Dravari fleet drifted in silence, and in distant corners of the galaxy whispers began to grow, tales of a planet that stood against the dark, that did not kneel when the stars turned hostile, and those whispers turned into warnings for some, and into hope for others, because Earth had shown that even the smallest world could change the fate of many. Years later, the scars of war still marked the land, but they were no longer symbols of fear. They were reminders of strength, and every time the wind passed through the metal flame on the hill, it carried a sound almost like a voice telling the stars that this world stood ready and waiting, that Earth would never be taken again. And so the story of the warriors who rose from dust, who fought in shadow, who burned brighter than any fleet in the sky, became more than a memory. It became a legend carried across generations, across worlds, across time itself. And though many who heard it would never see Earth with their own eyes, they would know its name, and they would know one truth above all: the aliens thought it would be easy, but they had never met Earth's warriors. The end.